Over on Jaguar Eater 7, a new baseball video is out. In this video, we talk about a bizarre controversy in 1984 between the Detroit Tigers and musician John Denver. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. 2 years ago, I made a video about this man right here, one of the greatest Olympians of all time, Carl Lewis. Even though you most likely know Lewis for his incredible 9 Olympic gold medals and 8 World Championship medals, including 4 golds at the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, and a gold medal in 4 consecutive Summer Olympics, when you think of him in the NFL sense, you think of him as the man who was chosen in the 12th round with pick number 334 by the Dallas Cowboys to play wide receiver. If you want to learn more about the history behind that pick, click the card in the upper right corner. Yes, the Cowboys actually drafted the track star who had no intention whatsoever of playing football, and who was likely never going to play it down with the Cowboys. The luck they had with Bullet Bob Hayes 2 decades before, where the Cowboys turned that Olympian into a wide receiver who revolutionized the game to the point where zone defense became commonplace, and to the point where he eventually got inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, yeah, that luck was not there with Carl Lewis whatsoever. However, as bizarre as this pick was, and as out of left field as this was, whether you agree with the decision by the Cowboys to essentially waste their 12th round pick on a guy who was likely never going to play for them, at least they consciously made that decision. At the very least, the scouts, the coach, the general manager, and everyone involved all came together to say, screw it, let's take a chance on Lewis. We've got nothing to lose. Worst case scenario, he becomes like most 12th round picks. Best case scenario, we can sell some jerseys and merchandise, and he becomes unstoppable for opposing cornerbacks and defensive backs, with his record speed being a huge asset in our offense. They made a choice, understood the risk involved, understood the likelihood, or rather, lack thereof, that this would pan out, and they came to this decision. I can't say the same about another 12th round pick from the 1984 NFL Draft. Somehow, drafting Carl Lewis was not the weirdest thing that a team did in the 12th round that year, as crazy as that might seem to believe. Because this man right here is linebacker Steve Raquet. And don't worry, I didn't mess up with the clips they are going to be watching of him in the CFL, as he wore a ton of different jersey numbers for some reason. With their final pick in the NFL Draft, at pick number 316, the Bengals decided to take the very good linebacker out of Holy Cross. On the surface, no big deal, right? Well, as it turns out, the Bengals drafted him completely by accident, and realized after turning in the card that they had made a big mistake. Imagine being so sleepy and so tired that you accidentally draft the wrong player, and realize after you draft him that this pick will never work out, because he will never play for you. Well, in 1984, that's exactly what happened with the Cincinnati Bengals. The draft started off as a mess, with the team drafting linebacker Ricky Hundley out of Arizona in round 1 and never being able to sign a contract with him. And it ended with a mess, with whatever the heck happened with Steve Raquet. Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the absolutely bizarre circumstances behind it, the dumbest draft pick in the more than half-century-long history of the Cincinnati Bengals franchise. Before I talk about what made this pick so stupid, and the bizarre controversy behind the selection of the Holy Cross linebacker, we need some context to understand just who this guy, Steve Raquet, even is. And before I go any further, I should note that even though this is a 12th round pick that we're talking about, and the odds of success are fairly slim, that doesn't mean it's impossible to find talent in this final round of the draft. Not saying it's likely by any means, but the previous year, in 1983, you had quite a few players go in this round that made great contributions in the NFL. Michigan wide receiver Anthony Carter went in round 12, and he finished his career as a 3-time Pro Bowler who led the league in yards per catch in 1987, and who had over 8,000 yards from scrimmage. Minnesota linebacker Carl Mecklenburg got drafted by the Denver Broncos that year in round 12, and he finished his career with 3 first-team All-Pros, 6 Pro Bowls, 79 sacks, and what really should be a Hall of Fame nomination, since he was one of the best linebackers of the 1980s and was a critical part in those Broncos AFC champion teams. So while it was by no means great in terms of your odds of finding someone in the 12th round, it was possible, and you didn't just want to throw away your pick. Take a gamble on a guy with a super low floor but a really high ceiling? Sure, but you didn't just want to toss your pick out the window like it was nothing. Which takes us to Steve Raquet, one of the greatest defenders in the history of the Holy Cross Crusaders football program. He's a member of the Holy Cross Athletic Hall of Fame for a reason, because he truly was special. Consider this: since the AFL-NFL merger in 1970, only twice has a defender out of Holy Cross been drafted. One of those guys was linebacker Ron McGovern, who went in the 10th round of the 1989 NFL Draft with the Kansas City Chiefs. He's the last player out of Holy Cross to get drafted, meaning that the Crusaders have gone more than 3 decades without hearing their school called. The other, Steve Raquet. In 1980, as a freshman, he immediately made his presence known by recording 10 sacks, which set the school record at the time for most sacks in a single season. He ended his career with 19 sacks, ranking first in program history at the time and 4th today, only behind Tom Smith, Corey Vincent, and Andy Martin. And he wasn't just a threat against the pass, he was also a threat against the run, as he recorded 32 tackles for a loss, which was the program record at the time of his graduation after the 1983 season. As a senior, he had 9 sacks and 87 tackles, being named a first-team All-New England player and a first-team All-Eastern College Athletic Conference player. And if you want to know part of why Holy Cross was a pretty good football team in the early 80s, compiling a 26-18-1 record and making it to the playoffs in 1983, the play of Raquet was a pretty good reason why, as he was named a second-team All-American at the Division I AA level. Scouts clearly thought he could play at the next level, as he even got drafted that January in the 1984 USFL draft by the Oakland Invaders. And the Bengals were impressed with what they saw. They were impressed with his power, they were impressed with his production, and they decided, in the wee hours of the morning, with their final pick, to take a flyer on the guy, especially since he was extremely versatile, seeing as he could play on the defensive line and at linebacker. Cincinnati went heavy on the front 7 during this draft, spending 4 picks in the first 11 rounds before this one, including their first 2 picks on that position. And now, they were going to make it 5. Because in the 12th round, with pick number 316, the Bengals chose the Holy Cross defender. The Bengals hadn't had too much success drafting in the 12th round, as I'll briefly explain their recent history. They chose linebacker Andre Young out of Bowling Green in 1983, and he never played in the NFL. They chose quarterback Dan Faraday out of Toronto in 1982, and he never played in the NFL. They chose quarterback Mark O'Connell out of Ball State in 1981, and he never played in the NFL. And they chose quarterback Mike Wright out of Vanderbilt in 1980, and he never played in the NFL. The last time the Bengals had a 12th round pick make it was in 1979, with defensive back Jim Browner, the brother of Bengal defensive end Ross Browner. But there was optimism when this pick was made that Raquet could break the streak. He looked like an NFL player. The scouts were high on him, he had the production in college, and he was valuable enough to warrant a pretty decent draft pick in the USFL. Heck, they already drafted one Holy Cross man in this draft by choosing center Bruce Kozerski. Why not make it a second? On paper, this seemed like a pretty solid end to a busy draft. There was just one small problem. There was just one teeny tiny problem that we need to talk about. Yeah, Raquet wasn't eligible to play for the Bengals, because a whole month before the draft, he signed a contract in the Canadian Football League with the Montreal Concords, which is the team that you've been watching him play with this entire time. In other words, he couldn't be in 2 places at the same time. He was contractually obligated to play in the CFL, and couldn't play for the Bengals, And for some crazy reason, the Bengals had no idea about this. Only after they drafted the guy did they realize, oh crap, we made a mistake. We chose a guy that can't play. It's almost like if last year, in a redraft, No Keepers Fantasy Football League, you spent a draft pick on Calvin Ridley, thought you got a steal, and then realized that he's not even allowed to play. The NFL draft ran late into the night, running until 2:30 a.m. in Cincinnati. And by this point, the Bengals were so exhausted that they chose Rocky and forgot to check whether or not he was even allowed to play for them. As Assistant General Manager Mike Brown said on this, possibly thrilled on the inside that this meant one less contract negotiation to work out and one less player that he had to pay, the league office supplies us with a list of players who have already signed with other leagues. But Rocky wasn't on it. We don't know whether Montreal failed to report it to the CFL, whether the CFL failed to report it to the NFL, or whether the NFL failed to report it to us. What makes this excuse crazy, and this deflection of blame crazy, blaming everyone else but yourself, is that Rocky's status with signing with Montreal was well publicized. It was in the newspapers. It's not like this was a secret. It was known for over a month. What makes it even crazier is that the list was not a guarantee. As Brown said, you draft at your own peril. You especially had to do your due diligence in 1984 and couldn't rely solely on the list, since not only was the CFL an option, but the upstart United States Football League was an option as well, which is why many people consider the 1984 class of the time to be one of the weakest ever, because that league was poaching all the talent. You had to do your homework on every player. It's like using spell check for an email. Yeah, it might help, and it might be a good starting point, but you still have to check everything yourself to make sure the wording is right and that the phrasing of the email makes sense. And what makes it even crazier, if that's even possible, is that the Bengals clearly drafted the other Holy Cross player in Bruce Kozerski. Kozerski obviously knew Rocky, seeing as they were teammates. Not once did the Bengals say, hey Bruce, by the way, we really like Rocky, and we're thinking about snagging him later. What do you think? What do you know about him? Is he eligible? This is like having the answer key right in front of you. You just had to say 4 or 5 words, and you would have known. This is just insane incompetence on the part of the Bengals. So what parting words did Mike Brown offer for why the Bengals chose a player that couldn't play for them? I kid you not. He said, at that hour, I guess we were all just a little worn down. I'm sorry, what? You said you accidentally drafted a player because you were tired? Can you imagine a GM saying that today? Imagine if, on Thursday, someone asked Jaguars general manager Trent Baalke about whoever he chooses with pick number 24. And Baalke says with a straight face, to be honest, we were all exhausted and just wanted some sleep. How is that going to work out for you? Not well, I assume. Not well at all. Every other team somehow managed to stay awake throughout the draft. Why couldn't you? This is your biggest day of the year. This is where you make your money and get your recognition. This is where you improve your roster, especially since free agency didn't really exist back then. You're changing the lives of people forever and helping them realize their dream. You're giving hope for fans who want to buy tickets to watch your team play. And you say, oops, we screwed up. We were sleepy. Wow. Just wow. Everything about this pick is just hysterically inept and incompetent. And I want to make it very clear. It has nothing whatsoever to do with Steve Raquet himself, who had nothing whatsoever to do with this. There are plenty of players worse and less qualified than him to get drafted. And he was a pretty good player in Canada, especially in 1984, when he led Montreal with 15 sacks. It has to do with the Bengals drafting a guy without knowing that he couldn't play for them, even though they could have asked his teammate, all because they were sleep deprived. Oh, and for those wondering, no, Rocky did not ever play a game with the Bengals or play a game in the NFL. Because of course he didn't. Why would he? Good job there, Bengals. because I think it's safe to say that to end the 1984 NFL draft for the Cincinnati Bengals, the selection of Steve Raquet was quite rocky. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.